All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar titled Power Changes, Innovations in Demand Response. My name is Jess McDonald, and I'm a manager at the Edison Electric Institute in the International Programs Department, and I'm happy to be the host for today's webinar. We are very excited about today's presentation, which is with Isabella Powell, who is the product implementer for Jemena. And she will be talking about Jemena's demand response trial called Power Changers. Jemena has, in fact, been selected as a finalist for the EEI Edison Award for Innovation, which is one of our most prestigious industry awards. But before we get started with the presentation today, I wanted to start by just quickly covering some housekeeping items for the webinar before we hand it over to our speaker. So as you can see up on the screen, everyone on the line is muted, and so as we go through the presentation today, if you have any questions, please submit them by using the chat feature. The chat feature is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And importantly, this webinar is being recorded. EEI International Programs has a YouTube channel, and so a recording of the presentation and the session today will be posted within about 1 week of today's presentation. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more about EEI's International Programs Department, and if you want to stay informed of our upcoming activities, please subscribe to our monthly newsletter, and you can do that by emailing international@eei.org, which is also up on your screen. So without further ado, I'm happy to turn it over to Isabella Powell from Jemena for today's presentation. Isabella?
Thank you so much, Jess. If you could make me able to share my screen, that would be fantastic.
All right.
There we go. Hopefully everyone can see my slides there. Bit of a sneak preview. Oh, geez. Sorry about that. Let's begin. Thank you, Jess, so much for the introduction there. And thank you again to EEI for hosting this event today. And we're very, very proud to be a finalist in the Edison Award this year in the international category. So Power Changes was a residential behavioural demand response project. And what I'm going to do today is go through the context of where we are, who we work with, what we do at Jemena, and what the problem was that we were trying to solve through Power Changes. I'll go through the program design and why it was that we designed Power Changes how we did. And we'll focus in there on the customers and also how we rewarded customers for changing their behaviour. We'll then work through the insights, results and learnings from the Power Changes program. And then for anyone who already knows about Power Changes, I think there's a few people from Jemena on the line here. This will be the world premiere of Power Changes 2.0. So please stay on the line and listen right to the end. So before we go into Jemena and what we do, I just wanted to take the time to talk about Australia and how we're kind of operating and how that might be different to other places around the world. So quite often, if you haven't been to Australia, you might be imagining our outback, our very arid, very warm and very harsh climate. But in fact, Jemena sits in Victoria, which in the map there is highlighted in orange, in Melbourne specifically. So the climate here in Melbourne is pretty unpredictable, but it is much more mild than our outback friends in Central Australia. Google tells me it's kind of similar to San Jose in California, just for reference. So in Australia, we down under, we do things a little bit differently or have things a bit back to front. So summer is December to February, and heat waves during those months and even into March frequently get above 35 degrees Celsius. or around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Something that's front of mind for customers in Australia is that over the past decade, electricity prices have increased dramatically and in some places tripled. So Jemena is really committed to trying to reduce the cost of electricity for our customers, especially for those who might be struggling. And a really important thing to note is that in Victoria, we already had smart meters installed. So that was a program that was already run through our state government. So who are Jemena and what do we do? So you can see there that we are an electricity distribution business. We own, build, maintain the poles and wires and other infrastructure to get electricity from transmission to our customers' homes and businesses. We don't just do that though. We have gas assets as well throughout the east coast of Australia. So we have gas transmission and gas distribution, but today we're going to focus on electricity. So our network, our electricity network rather, has 343,000 households and businesses within the northwest region of Melbourne. We have a mix of residential and small and medium enterprise, as well as some large industrial customers, including Melbourne Airport. We're one of 5 electricity distribution businesses within the state of Victoria, and we happen to be one of the smallest. Of those 343,000 customers, around 92% are residential when we look at that by volume. So it was really important that Power Changes targeted residential customers because there simply aren't that many options in demand response for residential customers. So if we briefly just take a look at where Jemena sits within the electricity supply chain, because it might differ for other listeners here. So we sit right in this middle part at the distribution line. So we get electricity from transmission through to our customers. What's important to note here is that we aren't allowed to generate electricity. And we also don't produce the bills that the customer sees. So quite often, our customers' only interaction with us in a traditional sense has been in the case of faults and emergencies. You'll note here that I have State Grid Singapore Power Australia assets. We are, of course, part of a bigger group, and State Grid, I note, were a winner of the International Edison Award last year for their Internet of Vehicles. As part of where we sit in the electricity supply chain, Jemena are very heavily regulated because our customers don't have a choice in who distributes their energy for them. We're bound by geographical boundaries. That said, we're in a rapidly changing market, and some of these roles are changing slightly, and demand response is one of our key focus areas. We're committed to listening to our customers and delivering them innovative energy solutions. So before we get into what exactly Power Changes was, I just want to make some acknowledgements of the partners that we had in this program, because none of this we could have done all by ourselves. So we co-designed this with the Victorian State Government, specifically the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Now in Australia, we tend to shorten everything. So if you hear me say DELP, I'm referring to the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Thank you to all the partners that we had for this program that was very successful. We certainly don't choose our partners based on their colours of their logos and how well that fits in with ours, but it does make for a very pretty slide here. So let's get into what Power Changes was. So this is just a bit of a spiel. On hot days, households can use 3 times more electricity than usual. Not only does this peak consumption translate to increased customer bills, but collectively it puts the grid at risk, especially in areas where the network is already nearing capacity. Additionally, electricity networks like Jemena invest in new network hardware to meet this peak demand. But this ends up going back into the customer's pockets and having to pay for it. So Jemena, in partnership with the Victorian State Government, designed a digital customer experience to trial a concept known as behavioural demand response. We called this Power Changes. So these peak loads put our network infrastructure at risk because they have an upper and lower capacity. More widely, they drive up the cost of electricity. If we think just briefly about the supply and demand curve, as supply remains relatively constant, as demand goes up, proportionally so too does the wholesale cost of electricity. So again, the customers end up paying more through their retailer. So let's take a look at what happens in these peak times. So we have the lowest consumption, generally when customers are asleep, and then as they start to do their daily activities, start to make their breakfast, have showers, get ready to go to school or to work, we see a small peak. Then, as most customers will leave their homes and go and run errands or go to school or go to work, we see a dip again in the consumption of their electricity. On normal days, customers will come home from their daily activities and start to use their TVs, their cooking appliances, and on hot days, what we add on top of that is air conditioning. And that's one of the main culprits for these excessive peaks that we see on very, very hot days. So before I move into this, the graph that I just showed you might look quite different for areas where the climate is quite different. Even in other parts of Australia, we'll see winter peaks instead of summer peaks. And typically it's again due to that home heating. So what were the principles that we designed Power Changes around? Well, we started with it being technology-led. We know our customers want to interact with us through technology, and there's an expectation that digital products will be the way forward. Going hand in hand with technology is data, and we have a wealth of data from our advanced metering infrastructure or smart meter data. And so what we did with Power Changes was analyse this data and set individual targets and enabled customers to be able to see their performance and track against it. We wanted to use that data and that visibility to empower customers to change their behaviour. So we had to give them individual consumption data and make that available to them as near real time as we possibly could. Coupling that with energy-saving tips and actionable things was how we enabled that behavioural change. Although customers were going to save money from their bills by reducing their energy consumption anyway, it wasn't enough to motivate them to change their behaviour largely. So we had to ensure that there was further customer benefit. In Power Changes, we trialled community benefits versus individual rewards, and we'll get into that a little bit further later in this pack. And finally, bringing it all together was communication. We realised that the customers typically were not interacting with us in the traditional way that our energy supply chain has been set up. So we wanted to make sure that not only did we value communication, but that we gave the right insights and that we'd be opening up a communication channel for the customers. So what did the customers actually experience through this program? So firstly, they signed up to participate, and many of them downloaded the Gemini app. They could also access this program from their desktop computer as well. They were asked then to participate in peak event challenges. And those peak event challenges was where we forecasted there to be those excessive peak loads on our system. To supplement the tips and tricks and actionable items that we gave them through these peak event challenges, they were able to access their smart meter data to track their usage. They could supplement the points that they earned by doing what we called learn and earn quizzes and other activities through the app or the desktop. And then when they accrued enough points, similar to a other reward scheme like you would get for a frequent flyer or your credit card, you would be able to redeem those points for rewards. So just a little bit further detail into those two rewards groups. So when customers signed up to participate, they were automatically assigned to either the personal rewards group or the community rewards group. So we didn't give them the choice, and this was based on their location. And we didn't give them the choice because we wanted to test how these rewards motivated them to achieve through their participation in the peak event challenges. So we'll go into a little bit further detail after we look at what a peak event challenge looks like. So on the left here, we can see what the desktop looked like, and on the right is what you would see on the phone. I know it's a little bit blurry, but basically we said, we'll reward you this Saturday if you reduce your electricity. We gave instructions and the finer details of when and what the terms were and how many points you would get. So customers could opt in or choose not to, depending on how they felt that day. So as the events unfolded, customers were able to track their consumption. We simplified the data that they could see so that it was really clear whether they were or weren't going to achieve their target. So how did they earn points? There were 3 ways that they could earn points. We had the demand response challenges. We also wanted to capture people's feedback and opinions about the program itself. So they got points for participating in surveys, and the learn and earn challenges that I mentioned before, where we asked them to learn things or to take small actions, and they were rewarded appropriately. So regardless of which rewards group customers or participants were in, the earning of points was exactly the same. The redeeming of points was where it was slightly different. So the personal rewards group could redeem in $3,000, $5,000 or $10,000 increments. And the community rewards group had very similar ratios of points to rewards, but these were donated to charity, and it started at a lower threshold. Overall, we noticed that the personal rewards group was the more engaged group. So let's look at the time frame. We had 6 demand response challenges that were called, which met the target of the program design. You'll note that recruitment opened at the start of December. And a really important thing to note is that this was where a lot of people in Australia are starting to wind down for their end of year activities. This is where the school year ends, where most working years end, and people tend to take holidays. So people were starting to go into holiday mode. There were further challenges with this timeline. There was behaviour differences between weekends versus weekdays. And if you take a step back and think about your behaviour on weekends and weekdays, it's not hard to see why it's difficult to predict what the behaviour will be. And of course, weather predictions. We couldn't plan the demand response events because they were tied to what the temperature was going to be. In Melbourne in particular, it's quite difficult to forecast the weather. And so we made a call that at 48 hours before the event would be when we decide that we definitely will go ahead with it. Even then, cool changes came through, and there were other changes to the heat waves that affected some of the results. Without further ado, let's go into the insights, results and learnings that we had from the Power Changes program. So overall, we had 613 households sign up. And of all of the customers within those suburbs, the average sign-up rate was around 2.1%. We had roughly an even split between the personal rewards group and the community rewards group, which is great for the analysis that we did further. The suburbs that we had in the personal rewards group was one very new suburb, I suppose, in Craigieburn. It is still growing. And the community rewards group were more established suburbs and much smaller, and therefore we had to have a few in there. The sign-up rate of 2.1% is something that we still consider a win, because we need to remember that customers don't really know the Jemena brand, and we were continually facing this credibility issue because customers didn't know who we were and what we're actually trying to achieve through Power Changes. We had a number of different ways that we recruited customers. We started out with direct mail, which was quite successful, but ended up being quite costly and quite time intensive. In hindsight, we maybe would have started with social media, especially given that it is a technology-led platform that we were trying to push. So social media did end up being the best method in both effectiveness and cost in getting customers signed up to the program. So on customers, we actually knew quite a lot about customers before we even started our Power Changes program. Because we'd done a customer segmentation activity beforehand, we had categorised customers based on their attitudes and behaviours towards electricity into one of 5 categories: lifestyle leading, always active, wallet watchers, impactful investors, and blissfully blasé. Where I've highlighted here is the always active and wallet watchers, where we anticipated very high engagement from these 2 groups. The reason for that is, as we look down the left-hand column, is the drivers of price and also availability of that usage management. So because we could make the data available to customers for them to be able to analyse and view, and also customers would be able to save on their bills and also receive a financial reward, we were very confident that we would have an overrepresentation of always active and wallet watchers within the Power Changes program. So this is the breakdown of what we actually achieved in that sign up, and we were right, always active and wallet watchers came out on top. Interestingly, they are overrepresented based on, in contrast rather, to their standing in the network wide. What was really interesting, though, is that when we look between the personal rewards and community rewards groups, there were quite contrasting behaviours in Wallet Watchers sign up and Lifestyle Leading sign up. So Wallet Watchers, being very price sensitive, of course, were very motivated by the personal rewards, and less so in the community rewards. The Lifestyle Leading were the inverse, and very motivated by this community rewards, and less so by the personal rewards. The learning from that is that we didn't necessarily target the Lifestyle Leading in the community rewards group. So that's something that we will take into the next power changes. Another very interesting insight was in customers accessing their live data. For the always active segment, we really anticipated that they would be very engaged in using this data quite a lot, because that's what they told us that they wanted to do. But what we found was that in most instances, they weren't really accessing it for very long at all. In fact, less than 2 minutes per day. What's even more interesting is that from the results, there didn't happen to be a strong link between those who were accessing the data quite often or at all and better performance in the challenges. Now, we did only have 6 challenges, so perhaps it is a matter of statistics. However, that's something that is inconclusive, and we definitely want to test as part of the next version of power changes, or perhaps people in the audience will be able to do that through their demand response programs. So how did customers actually perform? So most customers who opted in to participate in a challenge were able to achieve their target. On average, this meant between 0.4 and 0.7 kilowatts, or somewhere around a third of their benchmarked peak electricity usage. So this was the individual benchmark for their peak electricity usage during hot days. And what we can see from the graph here is that where this challenge was called between 4:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., there is a very distinct difference between the consumption from the demand response participants and the control group, which shows that we did achieve behavioural demand response. To go into a slightly more detail, we're looking at demand response challenge 2 and 3, because we had really great participation in those 2 challenges at almost a third of the total participants taking part in each one. When we look at what cumulatively these customers were able to achieve, it was amazing what they were able to achieve, but it's not quite enough for us to be able to get that network benefit. So the network benefit would be that we've reduced the risk on the network assets enough that we could defer or even avoid having to upgrade the assets altogether. But on a customer level, they certainly did receive the benefit. So on average, a reduction of 0.5 to 0.8 for each customer in kilowatt hours over each event, which would be reflected in their bills. So to recap, we demonstrated that behavioural demand response is possible. And on an individual customer level, we can reduce their peak consumption by around a third from their usual baseline individual peak usage. However, further optimisation in demand response is still required if we're going to achieve these network benefits. So speaking of benefits, what did the customers and community overall receive? Overall, we donated $35,000 to our community rewards partners, which included schools, parkland associations, and community outreach partners. In the direct rewards program, we rewarded close to $16,000 to individual participants through their gift cards. Now, anyone who's done the maths here in adding up the averages by participant, you'll note that it does seem a little bit off. In the community rewards program, even though the participation was lower and therefore the rewards were lower, Jemena made a contribution on top of that, given that we had budgeted $35,000 to give to these community rewards partners and helping the community therefore. Conversely, in the direct rewards program, where there was much greater participation, at $83 roughly per customer earned, not everyone actually redeemed their rewards. And so that's why it's slightly less than expected that we ended up paying. So overall, we wanted to know whether customers were satisfied with their experience with this program. And it turns out over 85% were satisfied with the program. And some of the comments really indicated that some of the communication, such as simply reminding people to do things at other times, like washing clothes not during peak hours, was enough to help them to achieve their goals. We also asked them, were the incentives enough for you to be able to participate? And overwhelmingly, we can see that a majority say yes, they were. Now, if we wanted to do this in a cheaper way, we could consider reducing the amount of incentives provided. But we'll see then the graph move to the left and we'll have less participation because customers won't feel it's enough. So we asked them whether they agreed or strongly agreed if it motivated them to reduce their electricity usage. And overwhelmingly, yes, it did. Customers reported that it helped them to save money off their electricity bill. And of course, Jemena doesn't issue the electricity bill, so we didn't actually know or couldn't validate that it would. So it's great to see that 70% of customers said that it definitely did. It motivated them to be more conscious about conserving electricity. And overwhelmingly, the respondents wanted to know more. They wanted Jemena to continue to inform them about their electricity consumption or give them information on innovative things such as electric vehicles, other renewables, news about outages, or other weekly insights. What we've done is enabled any Jemena customer with a smart meter to be able to access their consumption data through our web portal at any time. We've also made way in creating the ability for customers to report problems on our network or connect new customers. So let's go through the evolution of Power Changes. We've talked today about what we've called Power Changes 1.0, which targeted residential customers. This past summer, we trialled a couple of other things, which included direct load control. We had some DREAD devices installed on air conditioners, and those air conditioners we can control directly from our office. We also trialled some smart thermostat devices, which do a very similar thing, but are able to be controlled by the customer as well. We trialled voltage reduction, which is reducing voltage at the zone substation level, which is a very effective way at reducing demand without it impacting the customers whatsoever. We also trialled some commercial customer agreements, and we had a load shedding event, which was market-led, so it was beyond our control, where there simply wasn't enough energy being generated for all of Australia. So through this commercial customer agreement that we had, instead of having to take a whole suburb of customers off supply, we were able to avoid that. And several hundred customers avoided being taken off supply needlessly because we had this agreement in place. We also ran a Power Changes community education program. And this program was with one of the partners that we used through Power Changes 1.0 called Uniting. And they helped with our more vulnerable customers and groups that may have difficulty in understanding some of the messages that we would be otherwise targeting. And then in the upcoming summer, we're wanting to bring this all together into a dynamic portfolio of demand response solutions. So what does Power Changes 2.0 look like? You'll note that it's still underpinned by the same principles: technology-led, data-driven, empowerment, customer benefit, and communication. We want to maintain that digital interaction with our customer through technology-led solutions. We're including direct load control into the scope of Power Changes 2.0. We're also including not just residential customers, but our small, medium enterprise and commercial and industrial customers. We plan to bring in-house our analytical capability for this advanced metering infrastructure data. And from that, we want to build machine learning capability so that we can more efficiently and more effectively get customers the data that they want and how they want it. We'll continue our focus on education because energy literacy is a problem within Australia. People just don't know enough about electricity and how they can be more efficient. And we want to use the data that we have collected and created to be able to drive that change, to empower customers to make changes in the way that they use electricity. The customer benefit, we want to change the community rewards program to be a more innovative and community-led program. To do this, we're going to introduce rewards partners. We're continuing our customer engagement and expanding our digital channels. So it won't necessarily just be demand response that they're going to be interacting with us with. We want to support our customers to make changes to the way that they do things, and part of that is through communication. All of this will be delivered with different partners than what we used before. So to recap, it's not just residential customers. We're going to add Power Changes to a portfolio of demand response activity, involve new partnerships. We're going to start planning much earlier. In fact, we already have, and we've identified the locations already. So that concludes my presentation on Power Changes, and I invite you now to ask me questions.
Isabella, thank you so much for that presentation. I think that there's a lot that our global members can learn from the Power Changers project, and I think that you guys have a lot of exciting things to come with Power Changers 2.0. So as Isabella said, this is now moving into time for some Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, please submit them using the chat feature. A few questions have come in throughout the presentation, so I can kick things off. And so with this question, Isabella, it's kind of going back to the beginning when you were talking about how this is a very technology-driven demand response program. And this question is about the demographic characteristics of the trial area. Would you talk a little bit more about the demographics of the trial area and whether you have any analysis on whether the smartphone app that you guys developed was used more than the web portal, or what was really preferred by customers over the length of the trials.
Definitely. So we had definitely the smartphone app was the preferred way of interacting with the program, but there was definitely still a strong usage of the web portal, and that was stronger in the community rewards area. And I'll just find some details on the demographic of the area. I spoke a little bit about the segmentation piece that we'd done before power changes. So that informed part of why we chose the areas that we did. But then we have a wealth of data through the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which we could understand a little bit more about the demographics specifically of the customers that were in those areas. So the personal rewards group was in a growth area, so we had an lower annual household income in that sort of area and a larger household size, so an extra 1 or 2 people within the house in comparison to the community rewards group, which had a higher household income. It had a lower average household size, and it did have a higher amount of older Australians, so people who are retired seem to be more engaged in this community rewards group. So they were the ones that were more likely to use the web portal as opposed to the app.
Okay, great. Thank you. And another question has come in regarding the recruitment of trying to get your customers to opt into the program. So if you were to go about recruiting again, let's say for Power Changers 2.0, what new approaches do you think you would use? You mentioned using social media, but would you talk a little bit more about how you guys are looking at, improving your recruitment process?
Definitely. So first of all, we would definitely start recruiting much, much earlier. So I noted that we started recruitment at the start of December, and it was a real challenge because of the competing priorities of people kind of winding down into this holiday mode. So we plan on starting recruitment much earlier. And like I said, the social media seemed to be the cheapest and easiest way. So we'll probably start with that and supplement that rather than starting with the direct mail component of it, which still was quite successful. But if we lead with the social media, I think we'll have a stronger uptake.
Okay, nice. And another question has come in sort of looking at the different participation rates that you guys had throughout the demand response challenges. You mentioned that for the challenges, it was demand response challenge 2 and challenge 3 had higher levels of participation. Was that due to the time, the day of the week that it was held, or have you guys looked into that a little bit more?
Yes. So it was the day of the week, but also the temperature profile of the day. So in all of the challenges, there was a peak of 35 degrees Celsius or more. But if it started to cool down by the time the challenge was, or soon after, it definitely affected the behaviour. What also affected it was if it was part of a heat wave. So if it were multiple days in a row where it had been searing hot, like it has been, customers are less likely to even opt into the challenge because they are not wanting to sacrifice their comfort.
Okay, that's interesting. It makes sense too, from a behavioral standpoint. And then this question that has come in is focused on sort of looking at Power Changers 2.0. So one of the main benefits from the first trial was learning more about your customers, their motivations and attitudes. And you talked about this a little bit, but would you go into further detail how what you've learned will be applied as part of the next phase of Power Changers?
I'm definitely glad you asked that because you will note that although we had lower participation in the Community Rewards program, we're still pushing ahead with a Community Rewards program. And that was because we really wanted to leverage our learnings from the fact that the lifestyle leading segment really responded very well to these community rewards. Yet we didn't quite design it because we thought that it would be mostly the always active and wallet watchers participating. So if we can tailor the experience for the lifestyle leading within the community rewards, we again think that we're going to have greater participation. There are a couple of points here from the learnings, and I did touch on most of them. There's still that question mark around the live data and why customers weren't interacting with it as much as we had anticipated, yet they still managed to achieve their goals. So we don't know whether to invest in giving customers more real-time data or better analysis, or whether it's enough what we gave them.
Right. You're providing them with a lot of information and transparency, and I bet there is an expectation that more people would be logging in to see that.
Yeah. So it was surprising that they weren't, and I'd really like to find out more about why. And I think the only way we can do that is by continuing to test the way that we do things. Mm-hmm. The level of reward that we offered customers, we've had since a number of retailers running demand response programs with much lower rewards. So there is a possibility that we could offer customers, or participants rather, a slightly lower rewards level for achieving those targets as well.
Okay. And we have quite a few questions now to get through. This is great. So the next one, Isabella, is really looking at demand response in its entirety, really, and how it's really popular right now with the current market, but with future growth in both technological advances and community uptake of renewable energy, that there could come the point where demand response is not as crucial. Would you just reflect on that a little bit? And, from the Australian context, do you foresee that demand response will still be a critical component moving forward for you guys?
It absolutely will be. Some forecasts in Australia in the face of the fact that we will have so many more distributed energy resources might mean that rather than demand response being something to manage the upper limit of the network capacity, there also exists a lower limit. So we need to ensure that there is enough energy within our grid to supply those who aren't necessarily generating their own. And of course, if there are changes within the marketplace, particularly for changes in the way that the market works, for instance, if peer-to-peer trading exists, I don't have all the answers as to what that exactly will look like, but we still need a way to be able to, in more emergency situations, be able to react to fluctuations in demand and supply. And that's actually coming sooner than we might anticipate. I think projections are that there may be a negative demand as soon as 10 years' time in Australia, in parts of Australia at least. So I don't know whether you'd still call it demand response, but it's definitely something that we need to put in place quite similar principles and ensure that people are at the very least educated about energy.
Yeah, your comment on sort of the electricity customers in Australia, needing to learn a little bit more about electricity usage is certainly not something that's only relevant for Australian electricity customers. Certainly resonates across the globe. So here's a question on the forecasted demand. So how close was the forecast demand versus actual consumption for those customers who signed up, assuming the Bureau of Meteorology data was in consideration too? So those who are looking at the weather forecast.
Yes. All right. So off the top of my head, let me just see if I can find a figure on that. So just a note on the AMI data, so the smart meter data that we used. We have that data in 30-minute increments. So we do have a reasonable idea of when those peaks will occur, and the Bureau of Meteorology do have quite thorough, archival data on past events. So we can correlate with quite a high level of confidence what the customers achieved through, or what the customer's baseline was. And we actually did find, I can't find, a particular percentage or figure, but we did find that they were reasonably accurate with the forecasts.
Okay. And then there's a question here, sort of as you're looking at integrating like new technologies into Power Changers 2.0, do you envision that there will be any changes from the smart meter side of things with the ones that have been currently, deployed or that customers are currently using?
Yes, there actually probably will be. Perhaps not for the infrastructure itself, because it's been in place for just a couple of years. But again, due to changes in the market and the responsibilities of each of the market players as opposed to how it currently exists, it seems as though the smart meters maybe have a different responsibility, I guess. And I imagine that similar to what we did in Power Changes, it will be the changes will be good for the customer. It will enable them to have greater access to data, and importantly for things like the orchestration of energy and the potential to incorporate smart appliances will really emerge, and it will become part of this home ecosystem, in my vision anyway.
Well, I think, Isabella, we covered a lot of ground today, so I think we can wrap things up, and I just want to say thank you. This is a topic that is very important to a lot of EEI's international members, and it's certainly a topic that we want to have more conversations like this on. And so for those who are listening in who are EEI members, if you are interested in continuing this conversation, please email me. You can email either international@eei.org or email me directly at jmcdonald@eei.org, because I know that there's a lot that utilities around the world are doing in this area, and we certainly want to have more dialogues like this. So Isabella, thank you very much for your time and for this presentation. And we'll certainly reach out to you as we start to engage with our members on this subject even more.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to everyone.
Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, the presentation slides, we will circulate them within a week of today's presentation. Isabella, if there's anything that you want to remove from the slides before that, just let me know. And then we will have, they're good, okay. And then we have them recording, so we have a YouTube channel, and we'll share that recording with everyone on the line as well. So thank you, Isabella, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.